Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this extremely freezing Wednesday afternoon. It is so cold, and it snowed yesterday, so that's something. But in this podcast, there's a lot of things that we're going to cover. So in the first segment, we got the NBA in-season tournament. The quarterfinals have finally been set after the last stage of the group play. And so we're going to talk about who made it, and we're going to talk about why they made it, this, that, and the other, everything that you guys need to know. And then in the second segment, we're going to be talking about Joe Burrow possibly having the worst season of any quarterback in the history of quarterbacks. So we're just going to talk about that just a little bit. And then in the third segment, we are going to go over to MLB news, which is something that I did say I wanted to do, because there's this new rule that is being talked about that I think is probably one of the worst rules ever established. Like, if they end up putting it in the game of Major League Baseball, and I do want to talk about that in the third segment. And then in the fourth segment, we are going to talk about the Golden State Warriors finally hitting their slump, because a lot of people, and the Warriors themselves, they were not anticipating or expecting that they would be able to continuously play as well as they've been playing in the beginning of the year. And right now we're sort of seeing the decline in production and the decline in wins coming in from Golden State. So we're going to talk about that in the fourth segment. We also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you guys are interested. Before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it be a hot take, whether it be a burning question, or something you're dying to share. We're all ears. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. And the same thing will happen regardless of what you do. It'll really help the show. It'll make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So let's go right ahead. So in-season tournament group play is officially over. We have the Eastern Conference teams that are expected to play in the in-season tournament. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the let me pull up the slideshow. Give me 1 second. There we go. Well, not really a slide, but the website, because for some reason I couldn't find I couldn't find the actual graphic of like how the tournament is structured, but regardless, that's whatever. So as you could see, out of nowhere, the Milwaukee Bucks are the number one team in the entirety of the Eastern Conference. Darvin Ham is still undefeated in the in-season tournament, by the way, which is really, it's unbelievable to think about, but at the same time, it's a little bit, it's whatever, right? And the Knicks, they're also 4-0. The reason why the Bucks are ranked higher than them is because the tiebreaker is point differential, and even if they were similar in point differential, the Bucks scored more points. So there wouldn't really be any sort of debate on whether or not, on who is supposed to be up here and who is supposed to be in the 1 seed and the 2 seed. So then in the third, and by the way, that would mean that the New York Knicks, they ended up winning last night against Orlando, so I ended up getting that prediction right. Spoiler alert. And the Hawks, they ended up going 3-1, and they had a plus 15. Now, I know what you guys are probably thinking. Why did the Hawks end up winning this the third seed as opposed to the Orlando Magic, when the Orlando Magic have a much better point differential than the Atlanta Hawks? And the reasoning for that is because, let me pull up the other slide. Give me 1 second. If it'll pull up, there we go. Now you can see that the Hawks, they're grouped up with all of these teams. And none of these teams were able to make the cut because the the winner, the players, well, not the players, the teams that determine the spots, the top spots in the in-season tournament are the winners of each group. And so the Hawks, they just had a much better record than everyone else in this group. And everyone else in this group, every other team in this group, just was not able to compete with the point differential and the record of the Orlando Magic. So that's the reason why or the Orlando Magic is in the postseason, despite and why no, this is why the Hawks are at number 3 and the Orlando Magic are at number 4, despite the Orlando Magic having a much better point differential in the tiebreaker. Because as you can see, compared to every other team that was fighting for a wild card, they have the record and they have the better point differential, which is why they hold the wild card spot. And that's just, a little bit of an explainer how it works. Now, the Celtics, obviously, they end up what's really surprising to me is how, like, at the end of the day, the Atlanta Hawks, they ended up clinching this spot as opposed to the Celtics, despite the Celtics having a better point differential. But it's probably because the Atlanta Hawks, they ended up beating the Celtics. So that's probably why they ended up getting in there as opposed to not getting in there. But that is it's a little bit interesting. I do got to say that definitely is a little bit interesting. Considering how, the Celtics, they have the better point differential than the Atlanta Hawks, yet the Atlanta Hawks are the number 1 team in their specific group. So it's a little bit odd. I don't know how I feel about the Hawks holding this spot as opposed to the Celtics, because I understand that the Hawks, they ended up beating the Celtics in the in-season tournament, but still I don't think that's I don't know. I'm not entirely sure if that's valid, but regardless, that's one side of the conference. So now let's go over to West Side and get this Western Conference out of the way. So as you guys, I'm sure all of you are happy, the Lakers are eliminated. So boo-hoo. I'm upset that they got eliminated because they had to drop the last 2 games against Phoenix and against an injured OKC, mainly because LeBron doesn't know how to shoot. It is very, very unfortunate, but that's besides the point. So the Thunder, they clinch the number 1 spot with, obviously having a much better point differential than every other team, aside from the Dallas Mavericks, as well as the tiebreaker that they got between the Houston Rockets. So that puts them in number 1, even though it doesn't really matter, because that's usually how it works. Houston, they end up going in the 2nd spot. Houston has been a very pleasant surprise this year. And the Golden State Warriors, despite losing to Denver last night, they still had enough to clinch. And, Denver, the Western Conference was much closer than the Eastern Conference, at least in my opinion. Because it's we didn't know exactly who was going to, which team was going to make it in until the very last day for the Western Conference, where in the Eastern Conference, it was only okay, I'm not sure about 2 teams, but the Western Conference had way more possibilities and way more outcomes. And then the Dallas Mavericks, they host a wild card spot, and they have the best point differential out of everybody in the entirety of the group that they're in. Now, the group that they're in is, hold on just one second, let me pull it up. The group that they're in is with the Denver Nuggets, the Pelicans, the Grizzlies, and the Golden State Warriors. So they were able to they lost to the Warriors, which was the only loss that they had, but then they were able to win against New Orleans. New Orleans, excuse me. I don't know why I couldn't pronounce that. Then they were able to beat Denver, and then they were able to beat the Memphis Grizzlies. And because they have literally the big difference between the Dallas Mavericks and everyone else in their group play, aside from the Golden State Warriors, is the team record. Because everybody else that's on every other team that's in Group C, the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, and the Denver Nuggets. Hold on just one second. You can see that the Denver Nuggets, they're 2-2, so they don't have the record. The Grizzlies, they're 1-3, so they also don't have the record. And then the Pelicans are also 1-3, which they don't have the record, which is why the Dallas Mavericks are up here. Phoenix, they do not get chosen for this, mainly because because of the point differential being so wide. I mean, the Dallas Mavericks, they completely dominated in the point differential throughout the entirety of the in-season tournament. And the Phoenix Suns, they were really close. They were close, but unfortunately they had to drop that game against OKC, which ultimately ended up bringing them down here, which is unfortunate. The Clippers surprisingly performed better than the Lakers in the in-season tournament. The Lakers, they ended with a negative point differential. Meanwhile, the Clippers ended with a positive point differential. And it was just like, oh, that's disgusting to think about. That's gross to think about, at least in my opinion. But the Lakers, they do not deserve a spot in the in-season tournament because of how this went. So the way that the seedings are going, obviously the number one seed is going to play the team that has the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference wild card. So OKC is going up against Dallas, Milwaukee is going up against Orlando, and then in the 2 and the 3 seed are going to match up against each other as well. And it should also be noted that the Pacers, they ended up making it to the in-season tournament finals last year, but this year they have been unable to win a single game in the in-season tournament games. And a single, it was bad. It was really bad for them. Look at that point differential and look at that record. That is absolutely disgusting. And I'm surprised no one's really talking about it that much. I don't know what happened to Tyrese Halliburton. And, speaking of Tyrese Halliburton, notice how Tyrese Halliburton's team is 0-4, but Trae Young's team is 3-1. It's almost as if Trae Young is a better point guard than him. But I digress. So, as I was saying, the 2 and the 3 spot, they're going to play against each other. And, obviously, we know the Lakers, they did not make it. So, let's get into predictions. Why not? Let's see. Who do we think is going to make it to the semifinals? I am going to put my money on the New York Knicks. Now, if the New York Knicks win this whole thing, then most likely that everyone is going to clown them because it's like, oh, this is the only championship that the Knicks are able to win. Oh my God, or something like that. And then I'm going to just go with the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't think that the Orlando Magic are going to be able to beat them, at least with how the Bucks have been playing right now. I have a lot of faith in Giannis. I have a lot of faith in that man. That guy can drop a 40-point triple-double in his sleep. And I don't know. I'm just going to go with the Bucks on this one. I'm going to go with my gut. I'm going to go with the Bucks. I would not mind being wrong whatsoever. And now for the Western Conference, OKC going up against Dallas. I really, really, really want to pick OKC, but I'm more concerned of the fact that they don't have Chet Holmgren and that the injuries are going to be a little bit too much. And that the Dallas Mavericks do have some offensive firepower that they can use. OKC has some as well, but that one's going to be a really tough one because I can totally see Luka completely upsetting the entire competition. And then Houston going up against Golden State. I think Houston is going to end up winning in this matchup. I think the team is just better, and they're in a much better spot than the Golden State Warriors. I mean, you look at that point differential and how they've been able to dominate and win in practically every single game. I do understand that the Warriors, they were able to get the scoring done, but look at the Houston's defense. Like, the defense that they've been able to play on some of these teams. Granted, Portland is not really, I don't really think it should be considered a solid and decent team, compared to all the teams that they got to play in here. Still, Houston has proven to be a very good team in the Western Conference right now, so I would go with Houston in this one. But between the Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks, that one I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm going to have to sit on that a little bit, and I'll give that prediction at the end of the day when I finally make my decision, because it's really tough to figure out which one is going to make it. I genuinely do not know, but that's it for the first segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment where I talk about Joe Burrow and his ridiculous season that he's having and how unfortunate it is. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we're back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be looking at Joe Burrow and his ridiculous season. Definitely one to remember for basically all of the wrong reasons. Now, before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it be a hot take, whether it be a burning question, or something that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears. If you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show. They make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way as well. They really help the show. They make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let me just go ahead and pull down the screen. Let's go ahead and get into this rather impressive yet disappointing season for Joe Burrow and the Bengals. I mean, Joe Burrow, he's been fantastic. Like, there's really no other word to describe how well he's been playing aside from fantastic. Like, he has been on a ridiculous tear against a lot of teams, and it's incredible. Like, there was a little bit of a slump in the beginning of the year where they ended up losing to New England, and then they lost to Kansas City, and they ended up losing to Washington despite never punting in that game, right? So really the first game was like the bigger fluke loss compared to the other two games, because, you know, Kansas City, they've been incredibly lucky this season, like we all know that. And Washington, they've been a ridiculous surprise this season. We also know that. But in most of the other games that were played in this season so far by the Bengals, they've been scoring a lot. Like, the Bengals, they've scored 30 points in like 5 or more games, I want to say, and in about all of those games they ended up losing. Like, he had a 38-33 loss against Washington because on third down, Jaden Daniels threw this ridiculous touchdown pass in the red zone, and I did not expect Washington to score on that final possession like that. I thought they were going to run it out and take a field goal, but they capitalized and they ended up scoring a touchdown, which was incredible. Then they lost to the Baltimore Ravens in overtime, 41-38. They lost to the Eagles, 37-17. They lost to the Ravens again, 35-34. The Chargers, 34-27. And then recently they lost to the Steelers, 44-38. Now, what does this mean? Their defense is absolutely atrocious. The Bengals are letting Joe Burrow down strictly because of his defense. Strictly because of their defense. He is the only quarterback to throw 30 passing touchdowns or with 5 fewer interceptions through the first 12 games and have a losing record. The rest of the other quarterbacks that have done that were Aaron Rodgers, 3 times, by the way, in 2011, 2014, and 2020. In 2020, he had a 9-8 record. In 2014, 9-3, excuse me. In 2020, he had a 9-3. 2014, he had a 9-3 record. And in 2011, he was undefeated up until that point. Tom Brady did this in 2007, was also undefeated. Find it completely ironic how the two quarterbacks that were undefeated ended up losing to the Giants in the postseason. But regardless, Drew Brees ended up going. He ended up doing it as well in 2018, but he went 10-2. And Patrick Mahomes in 2020 did that, and he went 11-1. Joe Burrow, on the other hand, is 4-8. This Bengals defense is absolutely atrocious and has been completely selling out Joe Burrow throughout the entirety of this season. Like, it's incredible. And what's even more incredible to me is how the Giants, they were able to hold the Bengals to just 17 points. Like, the fact that they were able to do that is, in my opinion, nothing short of impressive. But, I mean, these numbers from Joe Burrow were absolutely ridiculous in some of these losses. I mean, the first loss to Baltimore, 392 passing yards to 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. The second loss to Baltimore, 428 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. The loss to the Chargers, 356 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. The loss to the Steelers, 309 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And really, when you let the Steelers drop 44 points on you, that's a very, very bad defense, because the Steelers, they're a team, while in my opinion, they're a good team and they're able to find ways to win, they're also a very ugly team to watch. And they're a team that doesn't really have that much of a consistent offense. Most of the games, when I do see them play, it's just field goal, defense, field goal. It's just field goal after field goal. They don't really put the ball in the end zone all that much, except in this game where it was basically a shootout in over there. And it's really unfortunate with the way that this season is going for Joe Burrow, because if he was able to, if they were able to win some of these games, and if they actually had a positive record, then chances are Joe Burrow would be in MVP conversations, because the individual numbers that he has are by far one of the best in the entire league amongst quarterbacks. And it's just, obviously, I'm not going to count out Lamar Jackson whatsoever, because Lamar Jackson is also an MVP frontrunner. Same with Josh Allen. But the difference between the two is that the wins, right? The wins are a very huge difference, right? So for Lamar Jackson, obviously his numbers are also MVP caliber, and they definitely deserve the utmost respect as well. And let's see. So right now he has 29 passing touchdowns, which is just 1 less than Joe Burrow, and he has 2 less interceptions as well. He does have him close with Joe Burrow in yards. Like, the numbers, they're marginal. They're like really, really close. But the big difference, the big separator from Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow is obviously team record, which is very unfortunate to say, because it's like, this really reminds me of the Drew Brees and the Saints, and that little era of football that we've had. I mean, I remember when Drew Brees, like when he was on the Saints. Now, the stretch that I'm primarily talking about was in 2014 to 2016, but there were also several other stretches where it was more or less the same thing with the Saints, right? Like, the Saints, when they had Drew Brees, their defense would be absolutely atrocious, but their offense would be phenomenal. So for 3 years straight, they went 7-9, and in every single one of those years, the trend was absolutely consistent. Their offense was brilliant with Drew Brees at quarterback, but their defense would be ranked either last in the NFL or dead or close to last in the NFL. It's like, and to make matters worse, they would end up losing way more in the playoffs, because his defense, the Saints defense, would let Drew Brees down when the lights are the brightest. I remember there was a game against the Niners, I believe it was, in the postseason, where Drew Brees had one of the best overtime, not the best overtime, but one of the best closing performances from any quarterback that we've seen. So, like, the game was really close. And Drew Brees, in this game, he threw 2 interceptions, and, like, obviously, he's not going to be perfect, but he ended with like 400 passing yards and 4 touchdowns, including 2 go-ahead touchdown drives in the final quarter of the game, and he still ended up losing because the Saints would just completely collapse on the defensive side of the ball. This was a trend that was constant throughout Drew Brees in his career. In fact, in one of the most popular regular season games, the Superdome duel between Eli Manning and Drew Brees, I mean, there was no defense being played all day, and the only defense that was actually played was from the Giants. Meanwhile, Drew Brees had to practically will his team to win with throwing, I think it was like 7 touchdowns in that game. It was ridiculous just how many touchdowns they ended up throwing together, because I believe they combined for, how many touchdowns was it? I think it was 13 touchdowns that they combined for. I don't know. The game was a very long time ago, and let me see. I'm trying to like figure out exactly. Yeah, because like the final score of this game was absolutely ridiculous. It was video game numbers practically, the final score of this game. But I believe, yeah, he did end the game with 7 touchdowns, and he also ended the game with 2 interceptions, which was the defense that was being played in that game. But there was no defense being played all day from the Saints, and similar to how there's no defense being played like when Drew Brees was on there, this is really like a similar thing with Joe Burrow. Is he going to be the next Drew Brees going into the future? I don't know, but let me say, this Bengals defense is absolutely disgusting, and that's all that I really have. I just wanted to bring that to the attention, because like this is a phenomenal quarterback who's putting up phenomenal numbers, but is just unable to really gain any sort of traction or recognition, because there's a good chance that he's not going to make the playoffs. And there's also an even higher chance that he's not going to win the MVP because of team record. So that's all that I really have to say. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of Joe Burrow in this season. So now we're going to go ahead and go into this third segment where we talk about the MLB and the new rule that they're thinking of putting in, which I completely, strongly, with the full passion of my burning heart, disagree with. So I will be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned for that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are and we are back with this third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we're going to be talking about this new rule, this new idea that the commissioner of the MLB is trying to introduce into the league. So Rob Manfred, we know he's been trying to change a lot of the MLB rules. We know the new pitching clock that was added as well. I mean, I personally have no problem with the pitching clock. I understand why other people, they might have a problem with it because they're not really invested in baseball as much as they probably should be in these games, and it does end up dragging the game on for a little bit. But the new clock that's added was, to speed up the game, and I completely understand why they would want to speed up the game to try and increase viewership, so that way people don't immediately click off it and watch something else. I completely understand that, but this new rule, the golden at-bat rule, is just, I think it's an absolute travesty to MLB baseball. I think it is the worst rule ever presented, and we have no idea whether or not it's actually going to be in the MLB, but I really hope that it doesn't. So this, the conversation about this rule floated during, in October, on the Varsity podcast with John Urand. Forgive me if I completely botched that name. And a lot of people, they really, really did not like this rule. I did not like this rule either. So the idea of this rule is rather simple. So once in a game, like, we all know that the batters, they have a lineup, right? Like, usually you cannot swap out a player unless, like, you cannot swap out a batter whatsoever. You have the rule, the order of how these batters are going to line up on the plate, and you stick with it no matter what. It doesn't matter the situation, it doesn't matter the scenario. But here, the way that this golden at bat rule works is that each team is going to get a at-bat card, right? And it doesn't matter at what point in the game it is. So let's say Shohei Ohtani, he was at bat in, like, let's say he was third at bat, right? And then later on down the line, the game is getting really close, and you have this, for lack of a better term, a random who does not have a good batting average and is most likely not going to have a good home run average in the MLB compared to Shohei Ohtani, right? So the rule essentially says that the rule presented essentially gives a team the chance to swap out a batter for somebody else given the situation, right? So I think that is an absolutely terrible rule. I think that is such a bad rule in the MLB. Not only that, but this also completely, like, aside from the rule just not making any sense in my opinion whatsoever, this completely destroys the past records that were set in the MLB, right? So we already have Aaron Judge completely shattering records in the MLB right now in terms of batting average and in terms of home runs hit in a season, right? And throughout previous seasons, we've had several of those batters as well. Now, you add in this golden at bat rule. Now this gives someone like Aaron Judge more opportunities to go to the plate when he shouldn't even be at the plate without this rule. So that destroys records. But not only that, imagine if this rule was implemented and was, like, from the start. Imagine if this rule has been a thing since for a long time ago, before any of us were born, right? Imagine how many fewer championships a lot of these teams would end up having, because there were a lot of games where several batters that weren't really good at hitting home runs ended up winning the game for their team in the end. I remember my friend, actually, he brought this up. He was saying that the Mets in a World Series, they had this, I forget the name of him. Again, this was before I was even born, so I have no idea about any of those games, because, again, way before I was born. And the idea was that the player, he wasn't really that good at batting, but regardless, he ended up winning the game for the Mets in the end. So imagine if you had the golden at bat rule in play in that situation. You probably wouldn't have had that home run. And it's like, why even implement this rule? I do not like this rule at all. Like, this is just a way to try and, I understand this is just a way to try and attract viewers to try and watch baseball, because it's like this also puts a little bit more stress on the defense, because it's like maybe they have to deal with Shohei Ohtani on one bat, and then they got to deal with him again immediately after. Which really does not, I don't understand it. I really don't like it. It's bad. It's just bad. And now imagine, and I'm a Yankees fan, so this technically benefits me, and I still don't like it. And it's a terrible rule. It's a terrible rule. Like, the golden at bat rule it's a whole different conversation with the potential to turn off, like, the most progressive baseball fans among everyone. Veteran baseball reporter Ken Rosenthal voiced that concern while speaking about the Golden at Bat Tuesday on foul territory. And he said, quote, "My instinct is it's not baseball." And I completely understand that. And you can't, this rule is not good. It's really not it. And as far as the automated strike zone, Manfred said that 2 versions are under consideration. First consists of home plate umpire who wears an earpiece and just calls what the system tells them to call, right? Now, again, this rule, it just makes my head hurt, because it's like all of these instances, it's really just to try and attract a lot more viewers, so that way they can see like Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge or Juan Soto, players like that end up getting to bat a little bit more. I don't like the rule at all. It could mess up a lot of it could mess up the future of some of these playoffs. And the biggest thing that I don't like about it is that it sort of takes away the spotlight from a player that's like supposed to be at bat. Like, imagine you are an MLB player who's trying to make a name for yourself, right? Imagine you are an MLB player that's trying to make a name for yourself, and you're not as popular as Aaron Judge. You're not as popular as any of these other big ball players and these big hitters in the MLB right now. And it's your turn to go up at bat, and you have a chance to win the game. Chances are that the coaches are going to pull you out and place in the better hitter, Shohei Ohtani or something like that, completely preventing you from making a good name for yourself, or like giving you a reputation of being a clutch hitter or a clutch performer. And I really don't like that at all, because a lot of people in the MLB are trying to make a name for themselves, and it's a very big league, and they're trying to and there's also minor leagues that those players are also trying to make it into the major leagues to make a name for themselves. And I'm Dominican, so I know a lot of Dominicans that go into the major leagues. They try to make a name for themselves, so that way they can make a good amount of money, and they can send that money back home to their family. That's usually what is done with most of the Dominicans, at least from my perspective and from the perspective of the rest of my family. That's usually what you do, and that's what my uncle would have done had he not gotten injured in his early career playing baseball. But that's really like one of my biggest concerns about this rule. I don't like how it's just going to it's just focused on star power. I really don't like that. But that's really all that I have. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this new Golden at Bat rule. I think it's absolutely atrocious, but maybe you guys think it's like, ooh, that sounds cool or something like that. I'm sure most diehard MLB fans are going to agree with me and say that this rule is disgusting. But with that out of the way, I'm going to go into a break, and then we're going to talk about the Golden State Warriors and their little slump that they're in. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors and their slump so far in this season. And how should I start this off? I was right, really. That's really the best way to start it off. I mean, I was never that high on Golden State. I did not like Golden State. I do not like Golden State at all because, LeBron fan here. So that makes total sense why I don't like Golden State. And I do like Steph Curry though. I don't mind Steph Curry. He's a fantastic basketball player, and I do like watching him. But their start of the season, when they were a top 2 team in the NBA, I could not believe what I was seeing. I genuinely could not believe how the Golden State Warriors, they were able to win these games, and they were able to play the way that they were playing, and how Buddy Hield was absolutely ridiculous against a lot of these teams. And I just could not. It was unbelievable. It was out of nowhere that no one expected the Golden State Warriors to really be good this year, and no one expected them to win as many games as they did. But here they are going on a slump. I said before that this is probably not going to last forever. I said that this was incredible, that this seems to be like a fluke. This seems to be like shooting luck. And that the Warriors, I also mentioned how the Warriors themselves, they don't know how long they were able to keep up that ridiculous performance and how often they were able to win these games. And turns out I was right, and turns out the Warriors were right to express this concern. So over the last, over the last 5 games, they ended up losing every single one of them, and like they just had a very, very bad month towards the end of November, right? In the beginning of November, they were solid. They beat Houston, they beat Washington, then they beat the Celtics, then they lost to the Cavs, but then they continued to win against the Thunder, against the Mavericks, against the Grizzlies. Then they lost to the Clippers, and then they beat the Hawks, and they beat the Pelicans. And then after those 2 teams, they ended up getting owned by every other team. They lost to the Spurs. They lost to the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, when they beat them, they were on a ridiculous run, the Nets. Basically, the Warriors in that game, they ended up choking. They ended up choking really bad in that game. They were up 18 points midway through the third quarter. Then the Brooklyn Nets called a timeout, and then the Nets went on a 57-29 run to seal the win. And that's embarrassing. That is a very embarrassing way to go out. Then they lost to the Thunder after beating them before, and then they lost to Phoenix, and now recently in the in-season tournament, they ended up losing to the Denver Nuggets in a very close one. Lucky for them, they still were able to clinch the in-season tournament and secure a wild card spot because they were the leading team in their group. So, it's really it wasn't a big deal, that loss, but obviously Steve Kerr is not going to consider this as not a big deal, because despite still being in the in-season tournament, this loss still counts to the regular season record. And so far right now, the Golden State Warriors, they've dropped all the way down to 7th in the Western Conference after being ranked at 2. This is mainly because the Western Conference is very, very, very competitive, and there's barely any teams that have a solid game difference between the team that's above them or the team that's below them. So it's like if you lose 2 games, you could lose around maybe 5 spots in the standings. So it's a very close. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for it being very close, much closer than it is compared to the Eastern Conference. But regardless, dropping from being 2, dropping all the way down to 7 is disgusting, and it's absolutely it's baffling. And a big reason for this slump, in my opinion, is just the inconsistencies coming in from Steph. Now, Steph is not having that much of an MVP, as good of a season as we're used to seeing him. He's only averaging 22 points per game, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. Again, not the same averages that we're used to seeing Steph Curry rock. But regardless, before it seemed like it was working, but because they weren't necessarily relying on Steph and they had to rely on the rest of the role players, I had a feeling that the success and the winning, it wasn't going to last forever, and eventually their shooting luck would run out, which was so far what's been happening in these recent games. Steph, he was the leading scorer against Phoenix with 23 points, but if Steph is leading in points and he only has 23 of them, that's most likely not going to win you a game unless everyone else is shooting phenomenally well from the field, which they did not in this game. I mean, Steph also did not really shoot well from three in this game either. And in the game against the Thunder, where it was relatively close, the Steph Curry wasn't even playing, so benefit of the doubt there, but at the same time, neither was Chet Holmgren. So you could argue that it was a little bit evenly matched in terms of injury status to their players. And then in the game against the Nets, which was just a ridiculous choke job coming in from Golden State, they had Steph Curry, who had 28 points, but obviously the rest of the team just was unable to follow suit in the performance, and they ended up choking the game. They just were unable to close out in that one. And then against the Spurs, where the Spurs, I mean, Victor Wembanyama, I know he's unbelievable, he's absolutely ridiculous, but Steph Curry, he wasn't the leading scorer in this game. He had only 14 points, and he was 5 for 16 from the field, and nobody else on the team was really able to bring in that offense. The team shot 37% from the field, so that's not good, and that's not going to have you win a lot of games in the NBA now. You got to be efficient. But all of these games, I mean, it's been it's been a very bad slump for Golden State, and it's kind of ironic how they're slumping and LeBron is also slumping as well, but that's besides the point. The next game that Golden State plays is going to be against Houston, which again, that's going to be it's going to be a very interesting game. I don't think that I'm not talking about the in-season tournament, by the way. I'm talking about the hold on just one second. I'm talking about the actual regular season games that are going to be going down, or maybe it is an in-season tournament game, but I doubt it. I doubt that it is, because the exact dates for these semifinal games are, at least right now, are a little bit unclear, and we do not have a deadline for it yet. Let me actually go ahead and check to see if they may have released the in-season tournament schedule, quarterfinals schedule, because I haven't seen it. And yeah, so the quarterfinals, they're going to start on December 10th. So not until next week. And the game that they play against Houston is going to be literally tomorrow. So this could be some good practice to get some good film in and figure out like what works and what doesn't work against this team, and depending on which team prepares a little bit better, could give them the advantage going into this game. But again, it's just a regular season game, so we'll have to see how they play against Houston. I don't think they're going to win against Houston in this matchup in the regular season, but if how do I say this? If they're able to prepare better against Houston with this loss under their belt, then they could beat them in the in-season tournament. They could beat them in the quarterfinal, because it's like, I mean, when you go up against the team and you end up losing to the team, one of the best things about losing is that you're able to learn from your mistakes, and that you're able to adapt to what you did wrong or what the other team was doing against you, and you're able to amend those mistakes, right? Like, you're able to make a difference in a game, because now you're like, okay, we lost because of this, I just don't have to do that, or we lost because I didn't do this, I just have to do that a little bit more. Like, you can definitely get way better in the film room just by going in there and paying attention to what you did wrong. So the Warriors, they could end up beating them in the in-season tournament, because Steve Kerr, he does prepare the team a little bit rather well. But again, maybe Houston is just going to have that much talent, and too much talent for the Warriors to be able to handle, because they are a very talented and young team. But that's all that I have to say in this fourth segment. Just wanted to bring up the slump from Golden State. And now we're going to go ahead and go into the fifth and the final segment, where I talk about the in-season tournament games that took place yesterday. While the in-season tournament has already been decided, these games still count towards regular season and the regular season record. So we'll talk about that right after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, we are going to be looking at the games that happened yesterday, and we are also going to be looking at the games that are going to be happening today and running some predictions on these games. Now, it's going to be a little bit quick just because I do have to get to class a little bit earlier, so I don't want to be late for that. Now, the Knicks, they're going up against they went up against the Magic. They ended up winning, and they ended up securing a good spot in the in-season tournament, and they won 121-106. This was a great game coming in from Karl Anthony Towns, who ended with 23 and 15. Josh Hart ended with 11, 13, and 10, and Jalen Brunson ended with 21. And on the Magic side, Franz Wagner had 30 points, but it wasn't enough. Regardless, though, they both ended up clinching, so it's totally fine. It's really not that big of a deal. Then the Mavericks, they ended up beating the Memphis Grizzlies. I expected them to win. They won 121-116. It was a very good duel between Ja Morant and the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic. Ja ended with 31 points. Meanwhile, Luka ended with 37 and 12 rebounds, along with 4 steals, which is rather impressive. Klay Thompson ended with 4 points, so 3 for 14 from the field. I think it's safe to say now that Klay Thompson is washed. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he's absolutely washed. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. As I mentioned before, the Warriors, they ended up losing to the Denver Nuggets because Jokic is the best player in the NBA and is most likely going to win another MVP. 38 points, 5 steals, 6 assists, and 10 rebounds. I mean, what can't he do? And let's see. For the Warriors side, as I said, Steph Curry had 24 and 11, but it just wasn't enough to go up against Jokic. Now, the Sixers, they ended up surprising me, and they ended up beating the Charlotte Hornets. Brandon Miller ended with 34 points. Nick Richards ended with 22 points and 14 rebounds. No LaMelo Ball in this game, which was probably the reason why they ended up losing. But Paul George, he had 29 points in this game, the first good game that I've seen coming in from Paul George in a 76ers uniform. No Joel Embiid, of course, because does Joel Embiid want to play basketball? I don't know. Tyrese Maxey ended with 21 points, 7 assists, and seems like Jared McCain, he's slowed down just a little bit, 17 points, but again, not that bad. Definitely not that bad. Definitely still a front runner for Rookie of the Year, at least as of right now. Now, the Bucks, they ended up destroying the Pistons. I finally picked the Bucks to win, and they ended up winning. They won 128-107. Giannis and Damian Lillard had a phenomenal game. Giannis had 28, 8, and 7. Dame had 27, 5, and 4. And Cade Cunningham had 23 points in this game and still ended up losing. What else is new? The Cavs, they ended up beating the Wizards because, of course, they did. The Wizards are an awful team. They're 2-17. They might end up being worse than the Pistons were last year, which is not really saying much because Washington was just as bad as they were last year. Evan Mobley ended with 19 points and 10 rebounds. Donovan Mitchell ended with 19 points as well. And Garland ended with 12 points. But really, you don't really need a lot of scoring when you're going up against the Wizards because, Jordan Poole is not that guy. Alexander Czar is absolutely horrible as a number 2 pick in the NBA draft. He was only picked up for his defense, and that is very sad. But that's besides the point. But now Jordan Poole, he ended the game with 13 points, 4 for 11 from the field. We all know he's like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of player. We have no idea whether we're going to get a good Jordan Poole game or a bad one. And then the Raptors, they ended up surprising me. They ended up beating the Pacers. Halliburton, he actually had a really good game, 30 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds. He did all that on just 16 shots, but that still wasn't enough for the Raptors. The Pacers, they have shockingly one of the worst defenses in the entire league, and it really shows. Scotty Barnes completely destroyed it, especially for fantasy players. 35 points, 6 rebounds, and 9 assists. Just one of the greatest fantasy picks ever, one of the most underrated fantasy picks ever. RJ Barrett also played a really good game, 29 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists as well. The Thunder, they ended up beating the Jazz because, of course, they did. The Jazz are also one of the worst teams in the NBA. SGA had 26, Jalen Williams had 28, And the Jazz, no one really had anything more than 17 points. So, yeah, just bad game coming in from the Jazz. The Suns, they ended up beating the Spurs. I had a feeling that the Suns would end up winning. Devin Booker was the main reason why they ended up winning, 29 points and 9 rebounds. And I believe with this game, Devin Booker moved up to 15,000 points in the NBA, I believe. I could be wrong on that. But I do remember seeing Kevin Durant make a tweet around how it might be a little bit more than 15,000, but again, I think it's 15,000 points. Well, that was the milestone that he reached in this game. And Kevin Durant, he did not really play well in this one, in my opinion. 13 points. He did only play 16 minutes, however. So I don't know, maybe he got hurt. I was unable to watch this game, so I can't really say anything about that. And the Rockets, they ended up disappointing me. They ended up losing to the Kings. The Kings won 120 to 111. And let's see, De'Aaron Fox had 22 points. Malik Monk had 17 and 12. And Sabonis had 27, 7 and 4. And on the Rockets side, Jalen Green had 28. And Alperen Sengun had 24, but they still ended up losing. And that's a little bit unfortunate. Those were, of course, I actually got 3 wrong today, but there were a lot of games. But then the Clippers, they ended up winning. It seems like prime James Harden is making somewhat of a return. I don't know what it is, but he ended with 23 points and 7 assists. And Norman Powell, he ended with 30 points. He's been an absolute shocker for a lot of players, for a lot of people in this season. And of course, with the Blazers, there was no one that was able to get 20 points. So not a very good game coming in from them. That's it for the recap, and now we're going into the predictions. The Nets are going up against the Pacers. I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm going to pick the Nets in this one. I do not trust the Pacers' defense. And actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, the Pacers are probably going to win now just because I said that. Lakers are going up against the Heat. I'm going to pick the Lakers in this matchup. Regardless of LeBron's shooting woes, I really hope that this is the game where LeBron turns back the clock and plays even better in this game against the Heat. Pistons going up against the Celtics. Celtics, that's an easy pick. Magic going up against the 76ers. I'm going to pick the Magic in this one. And let's see, next game. Bucks going up against the Hawks. I am actually going to... forget it. We'll pick the Bucks in this one. I'm still not very confident with them, but so far they've been winning, so I'm going to stick with the Bucks in this one. And I really don't think that the Hawks have any answer for Giannis. But next, the Clippers, they're going to match up against the Timberwolves. I'm going to pick the Clippers in this one. I just do not trust the Timberwolves nearly as much as I trust the Clippers, which is really saying a lot because it's like the Clippers, not a really big fan of them, but again, they've been playing some really good basketball lately. So that's all that I have to say. That's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe and leave a positive review. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or whether it's just something that you're dying to share. We are all ears. If you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend you use Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net. And Super Chat or using the link, really either or doesn't matter at all. And that's really all that I have to say on this podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care. Ooh, one more thing. And stay warm because it is getting cold outside.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.